In this video, I'm going to share with you guys 7 different tips that you can use to avoid getting limited or banned by the sportsbooks. If you're a profitable sports bettor, that likely means you're taking advantage of arbitrage sports betting or positive EV sports betting, or sometimes both. So if you are profiting off of these sportsbooks, you've likely seen some restrictions on your accounts. So whether that's, you're limited to $10 a bet, you're limited to 10% of, the max bet of a certain market. You've likely seen some type of restrictions. And, these sports betting methods, especially with arbitrage and positive EV, are only profitable if you have accounts that you can actually get bets down on. So if you're limited or restricted on certain books, these opportunities will no longer be profitable because they're no longer presented to you. So that is why we need to use the following tips in order to avoid getting limited or banned and prolonging your account's lifespan. So my first tip for you guys is actually understanding how these sportsbooks and these bookies categorize and bracket their customers and users. Right? So this first category is where we want to be placing what we want the sportsbooks to think that we are. It's called mug bettors or mug betting, which by definition means a stupid person or betting like a stupid person. Now, how are we supposed to be classified as a mug bettor, right? A mug bettor basically just means a person that's betting strictly for recreational purposes. They're not taking advantage of promotions. They're not taking advantage of sharp opportunities like positive EV or arbitrage. They're strictly a degenerate, normal person that probably uses their feelings to place their parlays and is most likely a losing bettor. Number 2, we have what I like to call the keep an eye on them category, where maybe they're taking advantage of some type of promotion. Maybe they're starting to use a little bit of sharp bets here and there. Maybe they're winning a little bit of money. It's nothing too crazy, but there are some flags going off in the bookmaker's head, or whoever's monitoring your account will likely just be, oh, let's just keep an eye on this person. They haven't profited too much. It doesn't look like, they're super smart bettor, super sharp bettor. But essentially, it's just keep an eye on them, one level up from a mug bettor. Next, we have actual restrictions being placed on the account. So when you first start to see limits, maybe like on FanDuel, you get limited to 10% of the maximum bet on a market. That's an example of a restriction or a limit. And then fourth, we have, to the point of no return, where you're actually banned from either a market or just the sportsbook or placing bets in general, right? So this means you can't get any bets down on certain markets or just get any bets down in general. And that's when you can no longer use the account or use that business or that sportsbook. So this brings me to my second tip, which is mug betting. Mug betting by definition literally just means betting like a stupid person. That's what a mug means. So when you're trying to bet like a stupid person, this essentially categorizes you into the sportsbooks have nothing to worry about category, right? So from my last tip, this is essentially where we want to be at, where we want our account to be placed in, because then the bookmakers will be off of our back and kind of stop monitoring us, hopefully, right? So the essential goal with mug betting is to get the bookmakers to kind of leave your account under no suspicion and just make them believe that they have nothing to worry about, when in reality, we are sharp bettors and we are going to be profiting off of them in the long run. Mug betting, we can do this by betting on inefficient markets, right? So things like player props or line bets, which is essentially a 50-50 coin toss with little to no value and a bunch of negative EV opportunities, right? So for example, we can just throw a bunch of parlays on NBA players' points, assists, rebounds, overs, unders, things like that, right? So basically, if we're betting something at 1.9 odds when they should be at 2.0 odds, we're essentially donating money to the sportsbook, right? This is going to categorize us as a mug bettor and leave them with no suspicion on our account so that they have nothing to worry about. And sometimes even with mug bettors, they will give us more promotions because they think that we're a losing bettor and they want to keep us on for as long as possible, right? A mug bettor basically means you're a losing bettor, you're betting for recreational purposes only. So that's what these sportsbooks and the bookies are going to try to target you to keep you on their account and their platform for as long as possible. So it works out better for us if they think that we are a mug bettor. And a tip is to, when you open a new account, right? When you open a new sportsbook account, I always like to mug bet in the beginning for a little bit just to get the account under the radar, maybe for like a week or two. Just throw a bunch of mug bets in there before we actually start taking sharp lines and sharp bets and profiting off of them, right? So this will hopefully lead to less monitoring of the account, and this will prolong your life's or your account's life, so you can make a lot more money within that time frame. So for things like, throw a couple long shot parlays in there, maybe some first touchdown parlays, a lot of stupid bets. Like I said, you want to make it seem like you're a recreational bettor. So when you first open in like a new account, a new sportsbook account, I always like to recommend, mug betting for maybe like a week, maybe even 2 weeks. So essentially you lose a little bit of money in the start to make a lot more in the long run. And this is kind of where the term upturned whale, if you've ever heard of that, comes into play. An upturned whale essentially just means, right, a person that's losing a lot of money and then they become smart and then they start winning money. Maybe they learn from somebody, they learn some strategies, and then they win a lot more in the long run. So you're basically just losing. Think of it like an investment. You're going to lose a little bit of money to make a lot more in the long run. So my next tip for you guys would be to avoid obscure markets. And what do I mean by that? So obscure markets is pretty self-explanatory. So for example, I see a lot of opportunities for sharp bets on things like Russian table tennis, Korean table tennis, things like that. Like nobody's watching these things. Nobody's even betting on these things, right? So if they see somebody placing $500 on a sharp bet on Russian table tennis at 4 in the morning, the bookmakers are for sure going to be a huge red flag and going to start monitoring and watching your account. And that's what we don't want. We want the sports books to be watching our account as little as possible, especially if we are a profitable mathematical sports bettor, right? So avoid very obscure markets like that because nobody's really watching them and nobody's betting on it. So when you're taking, let's say for example, if you're on the OddsJam positive EV tool and you see a huge opportunity like a 13% ARB or 13% EV, right, for things like Russian table tennis, like I just said, try to avoid it. It's not worth it, especially, if you're trying to bet and profit in the long run. Another thing is betting on things like races, right? Say betting on things like races ahead of time. So if you're placing a sharp bet on like a horse race 24 hours before the race, they're going to know that you are taking a sharp bet and that you're taking advantage of a mispriced line by their book. Because usually how sports betting markets work for things like races is a lot of the times people will just place last minute bets in maybe 5 to 10 minutes before the game. They'll see it on TV, they'll think, oh, let's just put $10 on it for fun. The majority of people aren't betting on a race with value 24, 36 hours before the event actually happens. So there's a couple of things to avoid. And one last thing I would actually avoid as well is a mainstream market like NBA player props, right? So when we're taking player props, the books can actually see that we're beating the CLV, which is closing line value. Very efficient market on the bookmakers end with little to no value and a bunch of negative EV opportunities. So betting on things like LeBron's over assists, over points, it's just not worth it. They're going to know that you are taking advantage of positive EV or arbitrage opportunities, and that's just something to avoid. I would instead take things like spreads, team totals. Those are great markets to target as well. Just very efficient markets. Like I said, is avoiding things like Russian table tennis, transitioning to things over like college basketball with a ton of lines, a ton of data coming into every single sports book, just because there's so much volume. College basketball is great. NBA, if we're playing NBA, avoid player props. Try to target things like lines, spreads, total points, overs, unders, things like that. Football is great, obviously soccer too. But yeah, long story short, avoid obscure betting patterns. My next tip for you guys is to size reasonably and appropriately. And what do I mean by this? A lot of the times, especially on the OddsJam site, they're going to have a calculator which tells you, the pure arbitrage bet or the pure arbitrage number to place on each side. So for example, it'll tell you to place $35 and like 27 cents on one side, and then it'll tell you to place like $50 on the other, right? So that side that is telling you to place the uneven amount of money, right, that $35.17, we want to kind of either round down or round up. So either 35, $40, whichever one is better, right? We always want to round. We never want to have an uneven amount of money. The reason for this is because if you really think about it, when is anybody ever placing, 17 cents on a bet? It's the entire thing of staying under the radar and avoiding limits and bans is we want to avoid being flagged and having suspicious betting patterns, right? Because it is a little bit suspicious if you're betting 27 cents on one side. Nobody's doing that. They're going to know that you're a profitable bettor and that you're taking advantage of these profitable opportunities if you're betting like that. Another thing is if you have, bonus conversions or bonus promotions where essentially they'll say like, oh, the max bet's $50, the max bet's $100. You never want to max out that number, right? So that amount. You never want to actually play that entire $50 or play that entire $100. You kind of want to size it down to maybe $30, $40, right? Because if you're always taking advantage of promotions, they're going to be like, oh, this guy's only, right, making free money from the promotions, and we're going to restrict him, place some restrictions, and then eventually limit and ban you. That's what we don't want. The next tip I have for you guys is to understand that different sports books limit you at different rates. Not every sports book has the same process in how they go about placing restrictions and limits on their accounts and users, right? So for example, we have the four main domestic sports books: DraftKings, FanDuel, Caesars, and BetMGM are highly reputable, known sports books inside of the US. But things like FanDuel, their limits aren't bad at all, right? You'll be limited to 10% of the max bet of a certain market. So sometimes that max bet is $10,000 and you'll still be able to place down $1,000 on that market, which isn't bad at all. But then you have things like DraftKings where they can see if you're hammering things like pre-match arbitrage bets on player props. They can see every time you're beating CLV, which is clothesline value, and they'll limit you fairly fast, especially if you're using pre-match arbitrage on DraftKings. So there's certain things that you want to kind of avoid and target depending on which sportsbook that you're on. So that's why it's very important to understand how your sportsbook works and which ones you're using, right? Then you have things like less reputable sportsbooks. So whatever you're using, that's less reputable, sometimes they'll limit you a lot faster because they don't have the money to actually keep you going, right? So sometimes you'll get limited after 2 promotions that you hit, and you'll be like, wow, like that was super quick. Why did I get limited so fast? It's because they're a lot smaller books than these big name things like DraftKings and FanDuel, where they can't afford to keep you going any longer, right? They can't take that risk because they don't have the funds to do so. And then you go over to some offshore sports books or even social sports books like Fliff, Novig, ProfitX. Those 3 are really huge because they don't limit you at all. So sometimes those are huge opportunities to take advantage of plus EV and arbitrage bet on because obviously no limits. And then obviously you have offshore books like Bovada, Bet 105, Bet US that also limit a lot slower compared to other sports books. Then even out of country sports books, like in Australia, I had a couple of clients use the well-known reputable book Ladbrokes, which tends to typically limit very fast, even like 1 to 2 weeks time. And my client didn't know that he was limited so fast that he actually lost out $600 on an arbitrage opportunity because he couldn't place that bet down, right? So things like Bet365 also is a recreational sports book, which has a ton of value for sharp sports bettors. But since it's a recreational book, they'll limit you very, very fast. So that's why I'm saying it's very important to understand the differences in certain books and how their limit process works. Tip number 6 is to avoid withdrawing your money from your account as much as possible. The only times that I actually withdraw from the account is when I need money on another account, or a different sportsbook has hit a balance of 0. So I transfer over some money over there. The reason we want to avoid withdrawals is because every time you withdraw a bet, it leads to a monitoring and an auditing of your account. And that's the last thing we want, right? I said in the beginning of the video, avoiding monitoring of your account is the main thing to kind of avoid and prolong your limits, right? So every time you withdraw, this is what kind of goes through the bookmaker's head. So the person monitoring your account and approving your withdrawal is going to be like, oh, this user wants some money. Let's see what kind of bettor he is, what bets he's placing, things like that. So like I said, the entire goal is to avoid monitoring of your account as much as possible, stay under the radar, withdraw as little as possible, because like I said, it's going to lead to an auditing of your account and they're going to know if you're a sharp sports bettor or not. Now, there actually are some exceptions to this advice, right? So when you don't want to listen to that, when you actually do want to withdraw very frequently, is when you are on a less reputable sports book that's not very popular, because like I mentioned earlier, they do sometimes engage in dodgier practices and will often restrict and kind of prolong your withdrawal process, right? So sometimes they'll really do anything that they can to kind of avoid you from taking their money out of your account and into their bank, which means they don't have to pay you out. So if you're on a less reputable sports book, I would definitely not listen to that advice and do kind of withdraw once you hit a certain amount and you do want your money. And my final tip for you guys is you need to understand that limits and bans are inevitable. If you're making a ton of money off of a business, they're going to ask you to leave, or they're not going to want your business anymore, right? If you are using strategies like positive EV and arbitrage sports betting, that means you are a winning bettor, right? You're taking advantage of these businesses, these sports books, and they're not going to want you as a customer anymore. I like to think of it as if you're walking into a casino as a professional card counter, you sit down at the blackjack table, you spend a couple of hours there, you make however much money, $10,000, $20,000. They're going to ask you to leave because they know that you are a smart, profitable gambler. Same thing applies to sports betting. Once they know that you are taking advantage of profitable sports betting strategies, while they're not illegal, they're still going to place restrictions on your account and not want your business anymore. So the entire goal with being a profitable sharp bettor is to make as much money as possible before your account actually does get limited or banned. Now, I like to think of it as a linear graph. So imagine a graph going like this. You always want to make sure you're making more money every single month than you were in the previous month, because that's the only way you're going to be profitable, right? That's the only way you're going to get value out of your account's life. If you're making less money than you were in the previous month, you might be better off upping your unit size, upping your bankroll, maybe even sticking to promotions and hammering more of those, right? So when it comes to profitable sports betting strategies, you always want to have the end goal that you just want to make as much money as possible while your account still has access to placing those bets, right? Compared to your 99% of average sports bettors that use their feelings to conduct research and place their parlays that are most likely losing in the long run. I always see a lot of comments and a lot of people telling me that, oh, why would you do arbitrage sports betting? Why would you do these strategies if it's going to lead to a ban in your account? A ban is not the end of the world. Limits are not the end of the world. There are things that you can do to continue being a profitable sports bettor, even post limits, post restrictions. Things like P2s, which basically mean more accounts. There's a whole Reddit thread, a whole Twitter thread. There's a bunch of videos on that you can go check out. But essentially what I'm trying to say is that limits are not the end of the world, right? If you are a sharp, profitable sports bettor making money, you're most likely, even once your account is banned within however many months, you're going to be more profitable than the dude that doesn't have any restrictions on his account for like 2 to 3 years. That's a mug bettor, right? A mug, he's placing stupid bets, he's using his feelings to do research, and he's losing money. Sure, those guys might make short-term profits, but in the long run, you're going to be a lot more profitable than they are. So that's why limits and bans aren't the end of the world, and you need to understand that they are inevitable. You can do whatever you want to prolong them, mug betting, whatever, you follow all of these strategies, your account will still result in a restriction or a ban if you are a winning bettor. Now, with that being said, if you guys learned anything from this video, or if you're going to apply any of those 7 tips to your profitable sports betting journey and you want to start winning and being a winning bettor, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more content just like this. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.